Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is a round 2 game from the 2016 Bilbao Masters Final between Wei Yi, playing on the white end, and Magnus Carlsen. This is now their second encounter. Their first was nearly 6 months ago at the 2016 Tata Steel Chess Tournament. As we can see just to our right, Wei Yi's rating 2696. At 17 years young, not a bad rating. It has been as high as 2734. I'm joking, of course, when I say not bad. It's more like exceptional. Clearly one of the most promising young players in the chess world today. And a name that will often spring about whenever there's talk of a player succeeding Magnus Carlsen. So let us see how their second fight turn out. d4. Carlsen replying with g6, modern defense, e4, ideal pawn center, bishop g7, knight c3. These next couple moves retain some flexibility with the black minor pieces. First d6. Black wants to acquire a little bit more information about white's setup. Bishop e3. Securing d4, and has a watchful eye already over the c5 strike. a6, preparing to expand on the queen side, and I know we're just 4 moves in, but there is a reason why white has held off on declaring the king knight. f4, white wants to have a few pawns contribute to control the center, and only then will the knight tuck himself in right behind the pawn. b5, preparing to fianchetto and make the knight feel a little bit uneasy. He can now be kicked at any moment. Knight f3, knight d7, helping with a c5 advance. e5, for the moment, this bishop is biting on a rock. Black sees this and will look to chip away at the white center and free the bishop. Bishop b7, this is a strong piece, maybe even stronger now without a pawn on e4, since it sees a little bit more of the white kingside squares. White sees this and looks to, with bishop d3, offset the bishop. c5, striking at the center, bishop e4. Light square bishops are now gone. Black continues to develop. And now we have a bit of a direct line, kicking off with move 11, d takes c. D takes e, breaking up this the e5 and f4 structure, helping out the bishop as a result. This pawn is passed, however, and is pushed. c6, knight f6, the queens are now exchanged, the knights are exchanged, this pawn is still around, and just a single square away from queening. Have to defend him. And what to do? Well, for black, number one priority is hunt down this pawn. But how do you do that? King d7. It's important not to go with the common here and just castle. He needs to play an active role. King d7 is the way to do it, with then king c6. You don't want to stay on this open file for too long. Can't. Bishop a5, just anticipating king c6 would hit with tempo anyhow. Knight f5. It's important not to, as black, recognize there's this tension here and, oh, can I not just win a pawn? No, you can't do that. If you grab the pawn right now, after queenside castle, rook d8, if you're trying to get the knight in the ball game now, it's too late. The rooks now have firm control over the d file squares, and how does this knight ever cross towards the queenside to try and dislodge the bishop? Can't. It's big trouble for Team Black. In fact, it's losing. The computer's already suggesting to cash out, and, well, guess who just turned into Pac-Man? Short story here is to not go pawn grabbing and instead improve the quality of your pieces as soon as possible. This knight, I know he's on the h-file, but he needs to drift over towards the queenside to dislodge this guy here, as otherwise black is all tied down and can't really He doesn't have any free pieces until this guy is off the board. Knight f5, looking for d6, pivot square, and then one of these two to strike at the bishop. Queenside castle, king c6, rook d8, preparing now to double. The knight is there just in the nick of time to post on d6, looking for these two. F takes, and now white just doubles rooks. It's important not to try and stop a move like knight c4. If you can't stop both of these knight moves, there's no reason to waste any time with this move right away. Just get another piece involved. At this point, white realizes that the c pawn will not live. So rook to d1, knight c4. White now turns his attention towards the e5 pawn. Bishop c3, rook takes c, b3, undermining the e5 pawn. Knight e3, the rook is under fire, so where do we go with him? Nowhere. There's a lot of calculation, pretty deep line here. White can actually allow knight takes rook. Bishop takes e5 was played. Knight takes rook. Now this rook is being threatened. So first we play rook d6. That's a check. King b7. And now we take the bishop. I'd like to just point out an alternative for black. Something that may run through your mind is at this moment here, after the rook d6 move, suppose the king goes to c5, maintaining pressure on the rook, preparing to meet bishop takes bishop with king takes rook. Well, let's see about that. Even if the king is going to c5 instead of the game move, king b7, we still grab the bishop on g7. If king takes rook now, notice we can take the rook in the corner, and now there's two threats in mind. One is to scoop up the knight and play a position where it's the two minor pieces versus the rook, and the other is to skewer the king and rook by way of e5, and the knight cannot move and defend the e5 square. So best is to, let's say, go to e3. We would have a check, and this balanced, I imagine still a little bit tricky, endgame. So that's what would happen if king c5 is played. There would be a way to maintain material equality. King b7 was played. Bishop takes g7, rook g8, and bishop to d4, doing a very good job in restricting the knight. There's only one square he can make use of, and he hops right to it, but for the moment black is in a restricted position. The rook has a responsibility. He has to watch over the knight. So white looks to disrupt the coordination between the rook and the knight with these next couple of moves. First, rook b6, check. Where does the king go? This is a good way to lose. Discovered check, there goes your rook. King c8, bishop e5. Look at how strong a piece this is. Striking at the rook, maintaining pressure on the knight. How do you move the rook and still defend the knight? Oh, here's a square, right? Not so fast. Because here's another skewer. There goes your rook. You're losing. You can't move the rook. Black recognizes this and says, okay, well, I might as well just get this dummy into play. To d8. King b2. Pressure on the knight. There's no rush with taking the rook. What white would really like to have happen is play a position where it's the two minor pieces and a rook versus two rooks. Knight d5. Only now does white grab the rook. King takes. Rook takes pawn. White is now up a pawn, 5 versus 4. However, after king b7, rook to a3, we got some awkward pieces here for white. And I don't know if it's too soon to try and point out some pattern, but when I reviewed their first encounter, I saw I'm noticing a little similarity between these first two games. That being when one side has a material plus, the side with the material plus has some not so great pieces. They're not so active pieces. This guy right here on A3. This is not his dream square. He's not really functioning like a rook for the moment, but white is up a pawn. Knight E3. And at this point, how to say, white needs to breathe. The rook needs some more squares. So we have the move C4, a good move to try and disrupt the pawn on B5. If he's no longer there, we can see a rook pivot on A5, and then there's at least some nice possibilities along the 5th rank. B takes C, and at this point, up into this move 34, it's been very level. However, there's an issue with white's next move, knight to E5. What is the big issue with this move? Well, it's allowing black to enter with the rook, give a check, give another check, and then have this pawn live. He remains passed. A better move, instead of knight to E5, is to play B4 and have the rook strike at the knight. There's some possibilities to next improve the rook. Now that, again, there isn't a pawn on B5, there is next some ideas of rook A5 into C5. And you could try to track the pawn down in that way. But by playing knight to E5, at this point here, black will find it much easier to hang on to this passed pawn. One who has some great depth, clearly just a couple squares away. White has connected passed pawns, but just having this one pawn with much higher quality, he's a dangerous pawn. These guys are still, the white pawns are still 5 moves away from promoting, compared to the one pawn 2 squares away from queening. So he becomes a number 1 priority. He's a serious, serious threat, without question. King C5, knight D6, knight C6, we have a check, king B5, and what do we do here for black? We're trying to push this pawn, right? So what should we do? Just get the rook out of the way and push the pawn? Hang on. If you do that, you've already fallen for a mate in 3. This last move by white is throwing a serious threat. Rook A7, king B6, rook C7. Let me put it on board. If black plays rook D2 here, clearing the way, that's what we'd have. Check here, and there's nothing that will stop rook here or rook to A8 next for checkmate. Of course, black sees this and runs with the king, preparing to meet rook A7, the move played in the game with king D6, getting out of that little mating net. Rook A4, securing the knight is black with F5, king B6, black scoops up a pawn, we have a check in there, and it's a race. A4, they still have a ways to go, but got to try to get those pawns pushing. Rook A2, not best. Computer's eyes immediately coming over to target the B pawn is best, but black is there, okay, with rook to A2 getting behind the furthest advanced pawn. I know he's just a single square more advanced than the one on B3, but getting right behind that furthest advanced pawn. A5, rook to B2 now, and we have king C7. A better try for white here is to play B4. Hang on to that pawn, and not try for this little trick. There's a little trick involved with the king c7 move. After rook b2, king c7, this pawn should not be captured right now. It wasn't captured in the game, but if it's captured right now, do you see the little tactic that white has? If you'd like to, go ahead, pause the video. What would you play in this position as white? Okay, the move here, should black have captured on b3, would be rook takes knight with check, and it's opening up this square for a fork. This endgame is actually pretty interesting. It would, in fact, turn out to be a draw. I'm not going to play all the way through it. But, yeah, you just have to trust me that eventually this is turning out to be a draw. So, there is that little trick. Rook takes pawn. This is a way that white could be saving that little tactic, knight d4. Black doesn't bite. He doesn't grab the pawn, but instead plays the move knight c5. Very strong move, preventing this pawn from advancing. Also, there's ideas where the knight can be the one who maybe captures on b3. And from b3, he's helping out support that final advance, helps to support that final square c1. Rook c4. Knight a6. It looks like this knight is going astray and will be trapped. He'll be captured, and that is what happens. But black has something up his sleeve. After king b6, rook takes b, check. Black is allowing the knight to be captured. Why? What must black do here? He's down a piece. But king d5. Notice the awkward placement. I know it's just this is just a, one position here, but here's another instance where, at least for the moment, white is up material, but these pieces, a little bit awkward. King to d5. And how are you saving these guys? Can't. You have to give up some material here. This is a nice try with rook to b4. If captures, the knight is there to recapture, and, he'll be there to stop the pawn. This is also a position that would result in a draw. Feel free to work that out on your own. You could just trust me that is the case. But we don't have to capture here after rook to b4. We could just push the pawn, and this is what happens in the game. Black just gets on with advancing the pawn, and he will queen. White inserts a check. King to c5. We don't want to allow the rook to pivot and get behind the pawn. Rook takes rook. Black now gets a queen. An imbalanced position. A knight, rook, and pawn versus a queen. Well, there's also a couple extra pawns over here, this being the more important of the two. He's the passed pawn. White needs to get coordinated in this ending as soon as possible. Otherwise, you could very easily see one of these pieces, the knight or rook, be picked up with the queen giving a check and hitting a loose piece. Queen c4, queen e4, there's a fork. You got to block with the knight. Queen d5. Main idea here for black is, what can I do to prevent the white pawn from advancing so that I could buy myself some time to advance my own passed pawn. Queen d5 stops a6. If a6 is played here, queen d7, the king has to move away from defense of the rook and mate in just a couple. So queen d5, white tries king c7. Black queen is there to dislodge the white king. King b7, queen d7 check, king to b8, and now this queen, a very disruptive piece. She has done a very good job in kicking the king away from defense of the rook. This is not a threat. White is not able to push this pawn successfully. So, and another way to view it is there isn't really a better post for the black queen at this stage. You can't really improve the quality of her position. So now is the time to get rolling with f4. And with that move, white resigns. It's just too slow, not enough time, not enough coordination for the white side to try and push through with the a-pawn. The computer points out knight to b4, queen to f5, a check can be thrown in, king to d4, but sure, you gave the king a check, but now this knight is getting in the way of the pawn, and the f-pawn will be rolling very, very soon. In fact, the a-pawn can already be picked up. So there just isn't enough coordination. The timing is just not there in order for white to pose any serious threat with their pass pawn. This f-pawn is, black's pass pawn, the f-pawn, is the far more dangerous pawn. So, interesting game, very sharp game. I don't know if you guys also picked it up, those of you that have seen their first encounter, but again, I'm noticing just from these two games this idea of one side, when they have material plus, they have a little bit awkward pieces. It's interesting. I saw that in their first encounter, a little bit in this game here, their first game in a while. Feel free, as usual, to leave any feedback to this video. Let me know what you think, as usual, in the comment section below. And as always, I hope you got something out of it. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.